My 8-year-old son just stood up at his birthday party, looked his multi-millionaire stepfather dead in the eyes, and exposed a secret that turned my ex-wife's face the color of a ghost. As her champagne glass shattered against the concrete, 25 guests went so quiet you could hear a car passing 3 streets over. I was standing there, holding a cake knife in my hand, realizing my boy hadn't just been playing with his toys for the last year. No, he'd been building a dossier of every lie they ever told me. And today, he decided to read it out loud. Honestly, it was like someone had pulled a plug at the base of Brantley's neck and let all the arrogance leak out onto my lawn. The sound of that glass breaking was sharp, final, sending little shards skittering across the stones like startled insects. 25 guests went completely silent. I'm talking about the kind of heavy, pressurized silence where you can actually hear the birds bickering in the neighbor's oak tree, 3 houses down. The kind of silence where a car passing 3 streets over sounds like it's driving right through your living room. And me? I just stood there behind the birthday cake. My hands felt unnaturally heavy, clutching the plastic knife I was about to use to cut the first slice. I was paralyzed by the sudden realization that my boy had been keeping a secret for over a year. A secret he'd been meticulously documenting in a frayed blue notebook. It was a secret that was about to blow apart every single lie my ex-wife had spent 3 years building, like a house of cards. My name is Donovan Rhee. I'm 38 years old. And if you saw me on the street, you'd probably smell the Pennzoil before you even noticed my face. See? I'm a mechanic. I own a small auto repair shop in Dayton, Ohio, called Reese's Garage. It's not fancy, and it definitely doesn't have a lounge with infused water or leather recliners. It's a boxy concrete building with 3 service bays, a waiting room where the coffee is always too strong, and a faded metal sign my father hung up 30 years ago. I can still see him on that ladder, grunting as he tightened the bolts, telling me that as long as people drive cars, they'll need an honest man to fix them. I took over the business when he passed, and I've kept it running through every recession and personal storm since. That's the thing Jolene never understood. Or maybe she just refused to. She saw that shop as a symbol of everything I wasn't. It was a ball and chain made of iron and grease. But me? I saw it as everything my father gave me. A legacy, a trade, and a way to provide for my family with my own 2 calloused hands. But according to Jolene, that wasn't even close to enough. In her mind, I was a failure, a man who peaked in high school and just kind of stalled out in the driveway of life. She viewed me as a guy who would never amount to anything more than oil-stained fingernails and a modest 3-bedroom house on a quiet street. The audacity of her delivery was what usually got me. She didn't just think it, she weaponized it. She told me that when she packed her bags, she told her high-priced lawyer that during the divorce proceedings, while I sat there in my only suit feeling like a criminal, and apparently, she'd been whispering that same poison into our son's ear for years. But here's the thing about kids. They aren't stupid. They don't just hear the words. They feel the intent. They watch when you think they're playing with Legos. They listen when you're arguing in the hallway. And they remember the stuff you think they've forgotten. Sometimes, when you least expect it, they stand up in front of a backyard full of people and tell the truth that everyone else has been too polite or too scared to say. That's exactly what Theo did on his 8th birthday. Let me set the scene for you, because the contrast is what still keeps me up at night. It was a Saturday afternoon in late June, the kind of perfect Midwestern summer day where the sky is so blue, it actually makes your eyes ache. I'd been planning this party for 3 months. I saved up extra cash by taking on weekend side jobs, replacing brake pads at 10 at night, just to make sure the budget was bulletproof. Now, I once saw Theo hiding that blue notebook under his bed with a look of pure terror. I almost asked him about it, but I didn't want to pry into his only private space. So, I just kept working. I stayed up until 2 in the morning the night before, baking a dinosaur cake shaped like a T-Rex. Theo has been obsessed with dinosaurs since he was 4. And I wasn't about to give him some store-bought sheet cake with a plastic toy on top. I watched 12 tutorial videos to get the frosting scales right. 12. I'm a mechanic, not a pastry chef, but I wanted it to be perfect because, for those few hours, I wanted to be the hero. The backyard looked exactly how a kid's dream should. Dinosaur banners were fluttering against the chain-link fence, and the folding tables were draped in green tablecloths, with little plastic raptors guarding the juice boxes. The smell of burgers and hot dogs was thick in the air, sizzling on a grill I'd scrubbed clean at 5 in the morning while the dew was still on the grass. My mom was there, looking proud in her floral apron. My brother Curtis was already on his third soda, cracking jokes to the neighbors. Honestly, it was supposed to be a good day, a normal day. And then, my ex-wife showed up with her new husband. And the atmosphere? It curdled instantly. I should tell you about Brantley Peaton. He's a vice president at some regional bank, 45 years old, and the kind of guy who wears expensive cufflinks to a backyard barbecue in the middle of a Dayton summer. He's the guy who finds a way to mention his job title within 30 seconds of shaking your hand, just making sure you know exactly where you sit on the social ladder. He drives a black luxury SUV that costs more than I gross in a year. He parked it right in front of my house, like he was planting a flag on conquered territory. As he stepped out, I noticed he was clutching a thick, legal-sized envelope. He kept tapping it rhythmically against his thigh with this smug grin, a grin that made my stomach do a slow roll. Jolene married him 18 months ago. She met him while we were still married. But that's a dumpster fire of a story for another time. What matters now is that she brought him to my son's birthday party, to my house, on my weekend, and within an hour of arriving, she stood up in front of everyone I know and announced that Brantley was Theo's new daddy. She didn't stop there. She went on this rehearsed rant about how Theo finally had a real role model, implying that his biological father, me, was just a loser who tried his best but could never provide the life Theo truly deserved. I didn't say a word. I just felt my heart thumping against my ribs like a trapped bird. Brantley caught my eye and let out a dry, condescending chuckle while he adjusted his watch. "No hard feelings, champ," he mouthed, loud enough for the nearest parents to hear. "Just doing what's best for the kid's future." I just smiled. I set down the cake, and I kept moving. Some people probably thought I was weak, sitting there and taking it while she gutted me in public. But I wasn't weak. I was just waiting. I was doing what I've always done, showing up, keeping my head down, and putting my son's happiness before my own ego. I had no idea that Theo had a plan of his own. I had spent years bracing for these hits. But honestly, you never really get used to it. I woke up at 5 in the morning on the day of Theo's birthday party, though calling it waking up is a bit of a stretch. My eyes had been locked on the slow-spinning ceiling fan since 3 a.m., tracing the same wobbling shadow until my brain felt like it was idling at a red light that would never turn green. It wasn't the alarm that got me. It was the sheer weight of the checklist running a marathon through my skull. I lay there for 2 hours, mentally counting the burger patties, the hot dogs, and the bags of buns. I visualized the condiments in the fridge and the stacks of juice boxes. I even worried about the dinosaur banner I'd ordered online 3 weeks ago. Was it straight? Was it secure? I still needed to frost that T-Rex cake, and my hands were already feeling a little shaky. See, when you only get your son every other weekend and a single evening a week, you learn to make every second count with a desperation that borders on madness. You realize that a birthday party isn't just a gathering with balloons. It's a statement of existence. It's tangible proof. It's your one shot to show your kid that even though you aren't the one tucking him in every night, you are still his father. You still care. And you're never going to stop trying. I finally rolled out of bed. The floorboards groaned under my feet as I made my way to the kitchen in the pre-dawn gray. I fumbled with the coffee pot, the smell of burnt grounds filling the room. The divorce was finalized 3 years ago, but honestly, some mornings the silence in this house still hits like a physical blow. Jolene and I were high school sweethearts. We married at 22 and had Theo when we were 30. For a long time, I genuinely thought we were happy. I thought the life I was building, the shop, this house, our little routines, was enough to keep her anchored. I was dead wrong. Jolene wanted more. More money, more social status, and a life that didn't involve checking the bank balance before buying shoes. She started dropping these little passive-aggressive comments about the shop, tiny needles meant to draw blood. She'd mention how I came home smelling like motor oil, or how her friends' husbands wore tailored suits, while I spent my days in grease-stained coveralls. At first, I told myself she was just stressed out. Then, I started to wonder if she was right and I was the one failing. But that shop, that wasn't just a business to me, it was a legacy. My dad built Reese's garage from nothing, and he taught me every single thing I know under those fluorescent lights. When he passed, I stood by his grave and promised myself I'd keep the doors open no matter what. I couldn't just walk away from his memory, but as it turned out, Jolene could walk away from ours without even looking back. I found out about Brantley 6 months before she officially asked for the divorce. It was a single text message on her phone, one she'd forgotten to delete, glowing like a neon sign in the middle of the night. I confronted her, expecting a fight, but she didn't even bother to lie. She just looked at me with this hollow, distant expression, like I was a stranger. She couldn't quite remember. The divorce was a massacre. Brantley paid for the kind of lawyers who charge $500 an hour just to breathe. They painted me as an unstable workaholic. They brought up every late night I'd spent at the shop, and every single time I'd missed a dinner because a customer was stranded. I didn't have the money to fight back against a bank vice president's checkbook. By the time the ink was dry, Jolene had primary custody. I was granted actini, that Arden every other weekend and Wednesday evenings. 14 days a month. That was it. 14 days to be a parent. And I swore to God I'd make every single one of those days count. Wednesday evenings became my North Star. I'd pick Theo up from school at 3:30, and we'd head straight to Margie's Diner. We had the same booth and the same order, 2 chocolate milkshakes and a mountain of fries. After that, we'd head back to my place to work on our secret project, a go-kart I'd rescued from a yard sale. It was a rusted-out frame with an engine that looked like it had been underwater since the 90s. Theo's eyes had gone wide when he saw it. "Dad, what is that?" he'd asked. And I'd told him, "That's our summer project, buddy. We're going to make it scream." Every Wednesday since, we'd been elbow deep in grease. I taught him how to clean a carburetor and how to check spark plugs. He'd hand me tools with the focus of a surgical assistant, his face smudged with oil and his head full of questions. I answered every single one of them. I wasn't just trying to raise a mechanic. I wanted him to understand that building something with your own hands is the only way to truly own it. I wanted him to know that fixing things matters. The go-kart was finally finished the night before the party, painted a brilliant red with a white racing stripe and a massive silver bow. I hid it in the garage, a secret prize waiting for the right moment. By 6:30 a.m., on the day of the party, I was finishing the T-Rex's teeth when my mom stepped out of her old Buick, clutching a casserole dish. "You're up early," she said. "Couldn't sleep," I admitted. She just nodded, knowing exactly what ghosts I was wrestling with. "Jolene called yesterday," she said, setting the dish down. "Said she's bringing Brantley." I kept my hand steady as I piped the final tooth. "I know." She was quiet for a long second. Then she reached over and put a hand on my shoulder. "Your father would be proud of you, Donnie. You know that, right?" I didn't answer, because I knew if I opened my mouth, I'd probably start shaking. 20 minutes later, Curtis showed up. He took one look at my face and shook his head. "She's gonna start something, Donnie. You know that, right?" "Probably," I replied. "And you're just going to take it?" I set the frosting knife down and finally looked him in the eye. "What do you want me to do, Curtis? Make a scene? Give her the unstable proof she's been looking for?" My plan was the same one I'd been following for 3 long years. Show up, stay calm, and put Theo first. I had no idea that my 8-year-old was about to tear that plan to pieces. I had no idea how badly my patience was about to be tested, or that the blue notebook in his backpack held the power to change everything. Conversations didn't stop, but they dropped into these low, jagged murmurs that made the back of my neck prickle. Parents who usually slapped me on the back, well, they were suddenly very interested in the ice at the bottom of their cups. It was like they were avoiding eye contact because my loser status might be contagious. Honestly, I caught a few of them giving me those tight, sympathetic nods. You know the ones. The exact kind of pity looks you get at a funeral, when people have just run out of ways to say they're sorry you're suffering. I kept working. My jaw clenched so tight, my teeth actually ached. I was pretending that my ex-wife hadn't just used our son's birthday as a stage to gut me like a fish. On the outside, I was just a guy flipping burgers. But on the inside, a war was raging that threatened to burn the whole fence down. Every instinct I had was screaming at me to drop the spatula, turn around, and lay out the truth for everyone to hear. I wanted to announce to the whole neighborhood that Jolene had been auditioning my replacement for 6 months while she was still sleeping in our bed. I wanted to scream that Brantley hadn't earned his way into this family. No, he'd bought his way in with a fleet of lawyers I couldn't afford to dream about. This real role model had never once shown up to a school play or helped Theo with a math problem. But hey, he was great at throwing money at a conflict and calling it parenting. I wanted to watch Jolene's face crumble into the same jagged pieces mine had 3 years ago when I saw those texts. But I didn't move. Theo was standing 10 feet away, his little hands stuffed in his pockets, watching my every reaction like his world depended on it. And I knew, if I exploded now, if I gave her that angry, unstable mechanic performance she was fishing for, my son would be the one paying the price for the debris. He'd carry the memory of his 8th birthday, not as a celebration, but as the day his parents turned his backyard into a battlefield. I couldn't do that to him. I wouldn't. So I swallowed my pride. It was bitter, dry, and familiar. I just kept my eyes on the patties sizzling on the grill. Around 2 o'clock, the crowd started to thin out. Parents made their exits, leaving only the small clusters of people who were maybe a little too invested in the drama to leave. Jolene was holding court near the lemonade table, her laughter ringing out like broken glass. Meanwhile, Brantley stood 2 steps back, just staring at his phone with a look of profound boredom. I needed a minute. Just 60 seconds where no one was looking at me, or I was going to crack. So, I slipped into the garage and pulled the door shut. The sudden cool of the concrete and the smell of WD-40 hit me like a sanctuary. The go-kart was sitting right where we'd left it. The red paint was gleaming under the flickering fluorescent tubes. I ran a hand along the smooth frame, my fingers tracing that white racing stripe we'd spent 3 Wednesdays getting perfectly straight. I could almost see him there, sitting on an overturned bucket, his face smudged with grease, as he handed me a 1/2-inch wrench and asked for the 100th time how the spark made the fire happen. This was the truth. Not the speeches, not the bank accounts, but the grease under our fingernails and the hours spent building something that actually worked. Suddenly, the door creaked open. It cut a wedge of bright daylight into the garage. I turned to see my mother stepping in. She didn't say anything at first. She just walked over and stood beside me, her eyes softening as she looked at the machine. "You built this together?" she asked. Her voice was barely a whisper. I just nodded. My throat felt like it was full of gravel. Every Wednesday, for 4 months, she reached out and squeezed my arm, her touch steady and warm. "Your father would be proud of you, Donnie. Not because you're rich, but because you're here. You've always been the one who stayed." I felt my eyes sting. A hot, sharp pressure was building behind my lids, and I had to blink hard at the rafters to keep it from spilling over. "I just want to be enough for him, Mom," I choked out. I was finally admitting the fear that had been eating me alive since the divorce. "I need him to know I'm trying." She didn't let go of my arm. "He knows, sweetheart. Trust me." That boy knows exactly who you are. I took a deep breath. I straightened the collar of my work shirt and pushed the garage door open. It was time for the cake. When I walked back out, Jolene was already choreographing the perfect family photo. She was shoving Theo between her and Brantley like he was a prop in a catalog. Brantley was actually suggesting they do a family portrait with the cake, his voice booming with a fake heartiness that made my stomach turn. My mother made a low sound in her throat that was definitely a growl. But I ignored the theater and walked to the table. I struck a match, the sulfur smell biting the air, and started lighting the 8 candles on the T-Rex cake. One for every year I'd spent loving this kid more than my own life. That's when I noticed Theo wasn't following his mother's directions. He was looking at me, then at the garage, then back at the house. He looked like he was standing at the edge of a high dive. He was breathing fast, a decision finally clicking into place behind those big brown eyes. "Mom, can I be excused for a minute?" he asked. His voice sounded smaller than usual. Jolene didn't even look up from her phone settings, just waving him off with a manicured hand. "Make it quick, honey. We're about to sing, and I want the lighting to be right." Theo disappeared into the house. For 2 minutes, I wondered if he was just overwhelmed by the spectacle. But then, he came back out. He was holding a worn spiral notebook with a faded blue cover, clutched against his chest like a shield. He walked slowly back to the table, ignoring Brantley's hand on his shoulder, and stood right in front of the flickering candles. The backyard went dead silent. Everyone gathered around, phones raised to capture the perfect moment. Jolene beamed at her screen. Brantley put on his practiced VP smile. And then, we all started the song. 20 voices carried happy birthday across my small patch of grass. But Theo wasn't singing, and he wasn't smiling. He was just gripping that blue notebook, his knuckles white, staring directly at me through the flames. The song ended. It was followed by a chorus of claps and cheers. Jolene leaned down with her camera ready. "Make a wish, sweetheart," she chirped. But Theo, he didn't blow out the candles. Instead, he looked up at the crowd and said, "Can I say something first?" Jolene's smile tightened. I saw a flicker of annoyance cross her face. "Of course, honey, but let's keep it brief, so we can eat." Theo opened the notebook. His hands were trembling just enough to make the pages rustle, but his voice stayed steady. "My teacher had us start a gratitude journal last year," he began, "to write down the things we're thankful for. I've been writing in it every day." Jolene laughed nervously, a sound like dry leaves. "That's sweet, baby, but maybe we can share that with the family later." "I want to share it now," Theo said, and for the first time, I heard a steel in his voice that sounded exactly like my father. "It's my birthday. I get to decide." The yard went silent again. A real silence this time. Theo flipped to a page in the middle. September 14th. "Dad taught me how to change a tire today. He said a man should know how to take care of his car and the people in it. He let me use the wrench." I felt really strong. My throat tightened until it actually hurt to breathe as I remembered that Sunday in the shop. He turned the page. October 31st. "Dad made my costume by hand because the store was out. I was a velociraptor. It took him 2 nights. But he said I was the coolest dinosaur at school." A few people in the crowd made small, soft noises. One mom actually reached out to touch her husband's hand. Jolene's face was a mask of frozen marble. But Theo didn't stop. March 8th. "Dad came to my school play. He had to close the shop early and lose money, but he sat in the front row. He was the only parent who stood up and clapped for me. He looked up then, and his eyes found mine in the crowd, 8 years old, and looking at me like I was a king. Then, he turned to face Brantley. The blue notebook was still open. "You bought me a PlayStation, Brantley, but you've never played it with me, not once. You said you'd take me fishing, but you always have work stuff. You told Mom you'd come to my baseball game, but you didn't show up. You didn't even call." Brantley's VP smile vanished, leaving his face looking hollow and pale. "Theo, honey, that's enough," Jolene hissed. She reached for the book, but he stepped back. "No, Mom. You said Dad was a loser. You said it in front of everyone." His voice cracked, but he didn't break. But Dad shows up every single time. He never breaks his promises. He built me a go-kart with his own hands, and he makes me milkshakes every Wednesday. I don't need a new daddy. I already have the best one. Complete silence. Then, Jolene's champagne glass slipped from her manicured fingers. It met the concrete patio with a sharp, violent crack. Honestly, the sound echoed across the yard like a gunshot. Tiny glass shards went skittering across the stones like startled insects. And Brantley? His face had gone white. I mean, not just pale, but that translucent, ghostly white you see in someone who's about to lose their lunch. He looked like a man who had just been publicly stripped naked. Every expensive lie, every performative pat on the back, it all just evaporated in the heat of an 8-year-old's honesty. He muttered something incoherent about needing air, his eyes darting toward the street, and he practically sprinted toward his luxury SUV without a single glance behind him. Jolene just stood there by the T-Rex cake. Her mouth was opening and closing like a fish out of water, searching for a script that didn't exist anymore. The audacity of the moment was palpable. I could feel the gaze of 25 guests shifting. The polite neutrality they'd maintained earlier, it was gone, replaced by a cold, judgmental stare directed squarely at the woman in the white sundress. But me? I didn't care about the neighbors, or the drama, or the shattered glass. I walked around the picnic table, my knees hitting the grass as I knelt down in front of my son. I pulled him into a crushing hug. I felt his small, narrow shoulders shaking against my chest as he buried his face in my work shirt. The scent of laundry detergent and faint motor oil surrounded us. "I'm sorry, Dad," he whispered into my neck. His voice was small, trembling. "I didn't want her to say those things about you anymore." I held him tighter. My own eyes were burning as I felt the weight of 3 years. 3 years of being called a loser just wash away. "You have nothing to be sorry for, buddy," I told him, my voice thick. "Nothing. You are the bravest kid I know." He pulled back just enough to look at me. Those big brown eyes were still swimming with tears, but they were shining with a new kind of light. "Can I see the go-kart now?" he asked. A tiny, tentative smile finally broke through the sadness. I let out a laugh that sounded more like a sob. But it was the most honest sound I'd made in years. "Yeah, Theo," I said, wiping a stray tear from his cheek with my thumb. "Let's go see the go-kart." The rest of the afternoon was nothing like the disaster Jolene had planned. Brantley's black SUV peeled away from the curb with a chirp of tires 5 minutes later. And that was the last Dayton saw of him for a long time. Jolene tried to linger for about 10 minutes. She hovered by the lemonade, making desperate, shaky excuses about Theo being overtired or confused by the sun. But honestly, nobody was buying the snake oil she was selling. The other parents looked through her as if she were made of glass. Eventually, she realized the social capital she'd spent years building had hit zero. She grabbed her designer purse, muttered something about prior engagements, and left. Without even saying goodbye to her son, Theo didn't even notice she was gone. He was too busy vibrating with excitement as he sat in the driver's seat of that red go-kart. His small hands were gripping the steering wheel like he was ready to take on Le Mans. My brother Curtis stood behind him, laughing as he gave the frame a heavy shove for the first few laps, while I worked on coaxing the old engine to life. When the motor finally caught, a puff of blue smoke drifted into the summer air. The backyard erupted in cheers from the few guests who had stayed to see the real show. My mother stood on the patio, her hand pressed to her chest and her floral apron fluttering in the breeze. Tears were drying on her cheeks as she watched her grandson zoom across the grass. One of the dads from Theo's school, a guy who had given me a pitying look earlier, walked up and stuck out a hand. "That's a fine boy you're raising, Donovan," he said. His grip was firm and respectful. "You should be damn proud." I shook his hand, looked at my son's grease-smudged face and his toothy grin, and realized I was proud. Not of myself, but of the bond we'd built in the quiet hours between the courtroom battles. The weeks that followed were a surreal blur of fallout and shifting tides. Jolene called me 3 days later. Her voice was a screeching siren of fury, accusing me of coaching Theo and poisoning his mind with my blue-collar resentment. I let her rant for exactly 2 minutes, checking the clock on the shop wall while I held the phone with a greasy shoulder. And then I calmly told her I hadn't even known the notebook existed. She didn't believe me, but for the first time in my life, her opinion felt as light as a feather. I said goodnight and hung up. Something shifted in her after that. The fire seemed to go out of her. She stopped fighting me on every little schedule change. When I asked for an extra weekend in July for my brother's wedding, she didn't send a lawyer's letter. She just texted back a simple, "Okay, maybe it was guilt." Or maybe she finally realized that no amount of bank VP money could buy the kind of loyalty Theo had for the man who actually showed up. 3 months later, the perfect life she'd built with Brantley hit a brick wall. Word got back to me that his business trip to Miami was actually a romantic getaway with a 24-year-old from his office. Jolene found the receipts on Instagram. The divorce was fast, ugly, and expensive. I didn't gloat. I didn't celebrate. Even though Curtis wanted to open a bottle of the good stuff, I just felt a heavy, dull sadness for my son. He had to watch his mother's world catch fire for the second time because the adults in the room couldn't keep their promises. 6 months after that fateful birthday party, Jolene called me again, but the venom was gone. It was replaced by a hollow, defeated exhaustion. She was working longer hours, drowning in the legal bills from her second divorce. And she sounded like she was at the end of her rope. She asked if I'd be willing to take primary custody of Theo. I said yes before she could even finish the sentence. No victory lap. No conditions. Just a promise to be at her house on Friday. That was nearly a year ago. These days, the house doesn't feel quiet anymore. It feels full. Theo's room is a disaster zone of dinosaur posters and model car parts. He's out in the garage with me every weekend, handing me wrenches with a professional nod. We still hit Margie's every Wednesday for chocolate milkshakes. Because some traditions are the glue that holds your life together. Last Tuesday, we were elbow deep in a new project. An old motorcycle I found at an estate sale for $200. We were trying to seat a new gasket, grease smeared across both our foreheads, when Theo looked up at me and paused. "Hey, Dad?" I looked at him, wiping a hand on my jeans. "Yeah, buddy?" He just smiled. A real, deep down to the soul smile. "Thanks for always showing up." I had to turn away for a second. I pretended to look for a socket wrench so he wouldn't see my eyes start to water. When I turned back, I ruffled his hair and tried to keep my voice steady. "That's what dads do, Theo. That's exactly what dads do." I spent 3 years believing the lie that I wasn't enough. I believed that my oil-stained hands and small house made me a failure in the eyes of my son. But I learned the hard way. Kids don't care about the balance of your bank account. They don't care about the brand of your car. They don't remember the size of the house. They remember who sat on the floor and played Legos in it. They remember who kept the promises, who sat in the front row of the school play, and who made them feel safe when the world was loud. They remember everything. And if you're out there right now, feeling like the odds are stacked against you, or like you're losing the race to a Brantley in your own life, listen to me. Just show up. Keep your head down. Keep your heart open. And keep your promises. One day, when you least expect it, your kid will stand up and tell the world exactly who you are. And that moment, it's worth more than all the champagne in the world. That's my story. Honestly, if this hit home for you, or reminded you of a father who never quit, do me a favor and hit that like button. Share this with someone who's struggling through a custody battle, or feeling like they're not enough. They need to hear this. Drop a comment below with your own stories of showing up. I read every single one of them. And if you haven't yet, subscribe and hit the bell so you don't miss the next one. Until next time, take care of yourselves and take care of the people you love.